Let's talk about what's happening right now, because the other brother's name has began circulating online in connection with the latest wave of Epstein related reporting. And this has really set off a very strong public reaction. Now, we need to be clear and very factual from the very start and say that the other brother has not been accused of any sexual abuse, any trafficking, or any criminal conduct. There are no victim allegations, no court findings, no settlements or flight logs or anything like that. There's not been really anything to link him with Epstein's crimes. But I think what's triggering the backlash is the appearance of his name within the wider Epstein context. And if you then combine that with the questions that people have for the institutional judgment and questions that people have in terms of transparency and how royal household responds when there is scrutiny upon them, well, you begin to think differently. So the specific issue that reignited attention involves the wildlife conservation charity Wild Aid. And this charity has been publicly supported by the other brother and King Charles. And according to an iNews report that was authored by one of their best sycophantic royal reporters, by the way, Wild Aid accepted a donation of $50,000 from Jeffrey Epstein in 2013, 5 whole years after his 2008 conviction for soliciting a minor. Now, the donation was used for general operating costs and it wasn't tied to a specific campaign. The charity reportedly sought additional donations from Jeffrey Epstein after, oh my God, but there were no direct meetings with Epstein reported. Now, crucially for me, the report states that the royals were not aware of the donation at the time. And that really stood out to me, and I'll tell you why. If you are not aware of what's happening in one of your charities, right? And if you haven't questioned the source of donations ever, and your royal brand is tied to that charity, who the hell works for you? What kind of people do you have working for you that don't do their due diligence? But anyway, let's continue. Now, those are the documented facts as reported. And yeah, I believe that if you want to read a full report, go to iNews and look at the details. But on its own, a charity accepting a donation years ago without the knowledge of very high-profile patrons will not normally invoke this big amount of outrage. Because, you might say, well, as a patron, it's not their job to scrutinize every donor. However, what changes, I believe, is the reaction and the history of the royal family. Now, the Epstein scandal has already demonstrated how very powerful institutions have ignored, minimized, or deflected any reputational risk while harm has continued under their watch. So we saw when Andrew came out and gave that Newsnight interview and lied all the way through and promised to cooperate and blah, 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 thinking that would be the end of the matter. But once the public learned how extensive Prince Andrew was shielded despite his well-documented associations, the trust in the institutional judgment just collapsed. So nobody believed the royal family anymore. That, everyone is thinking that whatever trust they had, that the public held for them, totally in the gutter now. And that context is what frames every story that comes out about them, because everyone is saying, well, right now, even some of the youngest incumbents to the throne are in their 40s now. So are you trying to tell me that for the last 10, 15 years, none of these people knew what was happening? And also, when Kensington Palace refused to comment on whether background checks were carried out on wild age donors, that silence, in my opinion, became the real story, because no allegation was made that, we didn't say that the other brother approved or even he knew of or even facilitated the donation. But in this post-Epstein climate, not answering a direct question, which is a basic governance question, it starts to look suspicious. And it's reading as using silence deliberately to deflect. And people are now assuming that the palace's silence is a choice, and it's being made to manage the optics of how everything looks. So this is why a lot of people are now talking about it online, because a lot of commentators are probably saying that the other brother is in the Epstein files, which he is mentioned, and there is an equivalency. They're saying, well, if his uncle's in the files and he's been mentioned in the files, maybe they've done the same thing. And this happens when institutions refuse to speak and when they refuse to clarify, thinking that, we'll maintain a dignified silence. Well, there is nothing dignified about being silent when thousands or hundreds or whatever amount of underage children were being abused. So, and I think there is a pattern here, and it's a pattern of how different members of the family are treated when there is controversy. So Prince Andrew retained protection, he retained his residence, and he had institutional shielding for even 10 years after this whole horrible shebang. And Prince Harry, by contrast, the quickness and the rate at which, they removed his titles, took his accommodation from him, took his security, threw them to the wolves. Even that alone tells you everything you need to know about the institution. And that contrast has permanently changed how the public sees any royal response. Because once again, the other brother's office has refused to clarify donor oversight, and many people are now immediately comparing it to the silence that protected Andrew over the years. So I think what this moment exposes is not evidence of criminality by the other brother, but it exposes a credibility problem for the institution, for him, and for everybody around him. Because the monarchy once relied on silence and distance and getting their various mouthpieces in the media to do their dirty work. Well, right now, that's not going to wash, because the various mouthpieces, they need to eat, they need stories. And this is a story that they cannot sit on for a long time. Because I tell you one thing, the press knows far, far more than we even think. Because we know that the press has their secrets, but the press know more. So, and this is why, in my opinion, this conversation refuses to die down. Because it's not about proving guilt when none has been shown. It's about whether the royal system has learned anything at all. Because transparency is no longer optional and silence no longer protects. But anyway, let me know what you think. My name's Elizabeth. I'm the author of The Luxpreneur. And to support my work, please get a copy today from Amazon, from Waterstones, or from Barnes & Noble.